Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital Today channel. Valentin Cassadine had faced enemies, traitors, and even death itself more times than anyone in Port Charles could count, but nothing rattled him like the sudden appearance of the mysterious figure standing at the entrance of the Metro Court lobby, a shadowed silhouette whose presence immediately sucked the air out of the room and forced every survival instinct in Valentin to ignite with full force, and in that split second, before he could calculate, before he could strategize, before he could even blink, the shock of recognition surged so violently through him that he reacted on pure adrenaline, pure fear, pure Cassadine instinct, and that instinct drove him to the closest leverage available, which happened to be Carly Spencer, who had just emerged from the elevator with a tray of fresh coffee and that familiar look of determined efficiency on her face, completely unaware of the storm gathering behind her. And in that moment, Valentin grabbed her arm with a force that surprised even him, positioning her in front of him like a shield as the figure stepped into the light, revealing a face Valentin never thought he would see again, a face tied to the darkest chapter of his life, a face he had buried in memory and sworn was gone forever, but now here it was, alive, unbroken, and watching him with a cold, almost amused stare, and the shock was so overwhelming that Carly gasped. Not because she recognized the trespasser but because she recognized the fear in Valentin's eyes, an emotion almost no one had ever seen from him, certainly not directed at another human being, and certainly not with this much desperation, and as Carly struggled to free herself, she hissed his name, demanding he let her go, insisting he explain himself, but Valentin barely heard her because every second felt like an hour, every breath like a countdown. Every movement from the figure like a reminder of every mistake Valentin had ever made, and while guests at the Metro Court froze, unsure whether to run, hide, or pretend they weren't witnessing one of the most bizarre confrontations in recent Port Charles history, Valentin held Carly tighter, whispering through clenched teeth that she needed to stop moving, stop talking, stop drawing attention, because they were all in danger, not just her, not just him, but everyone in the building. And even though Carly wanted to fight him, wanted to demand answers, she could see from the tremor in his voice that this wasn't one of his schemes. This wasn't one of his manipulations, this was genuine fear, raw panic, the kind only triggered by someone who had the power to destroy him, the kind only an enemy long thought dead or disappeared could evoke, and as the figure stepped forward, Valentin's mind raced through memories he had spent years suppressing, the secret mission in Zurich, the betrayal inside the WSB. The double cross involving a classified technology that could rewrite identities, the night he thought he had finally eliminated the threat permanently, and the chilling realization now that the past he had fought so hard to bury had come back in physical form, demanding payment, revenge, or something far worse, and Carly, despite her anger, felt a chill run down her spine because she could tell this wasn't personal to her. She was simply collateral damage, a pawn in a chess game she didn't understand, but the look the stranger gave her, a calculating scan that assessed her value not as a human being but as leverage, made her stomach twist because she knew how dangerous it was to be used as a bargaining chip by someone even Valentin Cassadine feared, and the room grew heavier, quieter, almost suffocating as Valentin barked at the nearest employee to lock the doors and call no one, absolutely no one, because he knew contacting the police, the WSB, or even Anna would escalate things beyond control, and Carly immediately realized this was someone who operated above the normal hierarchy of danger. Someone who answered to no government, no organization, someone who existed between the cracks of the world where normal rules didn't apply, and when the figure, finally stepping close enough for Carly to fully see them, spoke in a calm, measured voice. The entire room felt the gravity of the moment shift. The intruder addressed Valentin by a name Carly had never heard, a codename, a relic of a life Valentin had never spoken about, and the sound of it made Valentin physically tense, as though the identity tied to that name was one he had fought to escape for years, and Carly realized with dread that the man behind her wasn't just afraid, he was cornered, exposed, stripped of every layer of calculated confidence he normally carried like armor. But still he refused to release her, because he knew the second he did, the situation would spiral into something catastrophic, and as the figure smirked, suggesting Valentin had grown sloppy, sentimental, and weak since abandoning his former life, Valentin snapped back that appearing in Port Charles was an act of war that would not go unanswered, but his voice cracked slightly, betraying the fact that he didn't know how he was going to win this war, not this time, not against someone who had already outmaneuvered him simply by stepping into a room, and Carly, frustrated, frightened, and furious, demanded that both men stop speaking in riddles and explain why she was being held hostage in her own hotel, but neither seemed willing to address her directly, as though she were merely a prop, an object, a variable rather than the fierce, capable woman she was. And that enraged her because being underestimated was one of her biggest pet peeves, but even her anger couldn't keep her mind from racing through possible outcomes. Would this man hurt her? Would this be another traumatic chapter in a life already full of them? Or was she just the unfortunate bystander caught in the crossfire of a Cassadine conflict older and deeper than anything she'd ever known? And as Valentin felt Carly tense in his grip, he whispered, barely audible, an apology, a genuine one, the kind he rarely gave, telling her he had no choice, telling her this person wasn't just dangerous but unstoppable, a ghost resurrected, a phantom that should not exist. And Carly's frustration wavered when she heard the tremor of sincerity, because Valentin Cassadine didn't apologize unless he meant it, and that scared her even more, because if he was apologizing while holding her hostage, it meant he believed there was a very real chance neither of them would leave the room alive, and the figure, sensing Valentin's unraveling control, taunted him by revealing they knew about Charlotte, about Anna, about ELQ, about every pressure point in Valentin's life, every vulnerability he possessed, and Carly felt his grip tighten protectively, not aggressively, as if he were shielding her from something he believed could destroy them both. And while security tried to inch closer, Valentin shouted for everyone to stay back, to remain still, because this enemy operated on precision, on triggers, on psychological warfare, and a single misstep could set off consequences that could ripple through Port Charles for years. And the figure continued speaking, recounting details of past missions Valentin had hoped were classified forever, details only someone with intimate access and personal betrayal could know, details that made Carly see Valentin in a new, unsettling light, not as the suave businessman, not as the morally gray ally, but as a former operative capable of things she didn't even want to imagine. And as the intruder ended their monologue with the ominous declaration that they had come not just for revenge but for reclamation, for reclaiming a debt, reclaiming power, reclaiming control, Valentin felt the weight of every mistake, every secret, every lie he had ever buried crushing his chest, and Carly, though still fighting the urge to break free, realized the stakes were far larger than her personal safety. This was a collision of histories, ideologies, and betrayals that predated her involvement, and she was now trapped in the eye of the storm, forced into the role of bargaining chip and witness as Valentin and this mysterious figure faced each other with decades of unspoken hatred simmering beneath the surface. And as the room vibrated with tension, as security hovered helplessly, as guests trembled, as Valentin tried to buy time and Carly tried to stay calm, the figure finally issued their ultimatum. Valentin had 1 hour to make a choice: surrender the classified data he had stolen years ago or watch Carly Spencer become the first casualty in a war he could no longer outrun. And as their voice echoed through the lobby, Valentin's expression shifted from fear to cold determination, the transformation haunting and instantaneous, because if there was one thing Valentin Cassadine was capable of, it was fighting with ruthless precision when the people around him were threatened. And Carly felt that shift too, realizing that while she was still technically his hostage, she was now also someone he was sworn to protect, not out of strategy but out of reluctant alliance, and perhaps something deeper, something even he didn't understand yet. And as the intruder stepped back, giving him space to decide, Valentin whispered to Carly that he would get her out alive, no matter what it cost him, no matter what demons he had to confront, no matter what secrets he had to expose. And though Carly didn't fully trust him, in that moment she believed him, because the desperation in his voice was matched only by the fierce determination blazing in his eyes. And as the hour of reckoning began, the tension inside the Metro court swelled into a boiling storm that promised to explode into a battle of past versus present, vengeance versus redemption, and the terrifying truth that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one you thought you buried, the one who knows your darkest sins, and the one who returns at the worst possible moment to force you to pay for every one of them. The silence that followed the intruder's ultimatum felt like a physical pressure crushing the air out of every lung in the room, and as Valentin kept his grip on Carly, no longer as a shield but as a desperate effort to keep her close, to keep her safe. His mind raced with calculations, escape routes, alternate strategies, and the increasingly unavoidable truth that this situation could not be resolved without revisiting the darkest corridors of his past, a past so treacherous and secretive that even Anna Devane only knew fragments, and Carly, breathing shallowly, could feel the tension coiling through him like a tightening wire ready to snap, yet she also sensed something else beneath that panic, resolve, fierce and unwavering, the kind of resolve only a Cassadine could possess when backed into a corner with someone innocent at stake. And while she still resented being held hostage, a part of her, the part molded by decades of living through danger, understood instinctively that letting go of her now would expose them both to unpredictable retaliation from the intruder, who watched them with an unsettling calmness, the kind of calm only someone who had already anticipated every move could maintain. And as guests huddled in corners and employees trembled behind counters, the Metro Court lobby seemed to shrink, the walls inching inward as if Port Charles itself was holding its breath, waiting to see whether the next chapter of this confrontation would erupt in chaos or end in catastrophic silence. And Carly forced herself to speak, her voice low but steady as she told Valentin that he needed to start explaining what was going on because she refused to walk blindly through a war she didn't understand, and he told her, still without releasing her, that this was not a simple enemy, not a Cassadine rival, not a mob threat, not even a governmental adversary, but someone tied to a covert world that existed above nations, beyond laws, a world built on shadows and secrets, where alliances shifted like sand and betrayal was currency. And Carly, despite her fear, absorbed every word because she needed to know what she was up against, not just for herself but for her family, her hotel, her city. And Valentin, taking a breath that shook with the weight of memory, admitted that years ago he had taken something, stolen something, that the intruder now wanted returned, something more dangerous than money, more volatile than weaponry, something that could wipe identities, rewrite digital histories, alter entire lives with a single keystroke. And Carly's heart lurched because she realized the stakes weren't personal to her but could become catastrophic for anyone the intruder chose to target, and she whispered, barely controlling the tremor in her voice, asking if the intruder planned to use her as proof of power. And Valentin nodded grimly, saying this person thrived on leverage, thrived on psychological pressure, thrived on breaking their targets down piece by piece until they surrendered everything. And Carly felt a chill course through her because she'd faced dangerous people before, mobsters, kidnappers, murderers, but there was something different about this, something almost clinical, methodical, as if she were a variable in a calculation rather than a human being. And the intruder, hearing their whispered conversation, took a few deliberate steps closer, prompting Valentin to tighten his hold and pull Carly slightly behind him in a protective motion that surprised even her. And the intruder's voice, cold and precise, cut through the air as they reminded Valentin that he had less than an hour to decide, and that any attempt to escape, call for external backup, or mislead them would result in consequences far more devastating than anything he could imagine. And as the words hung in the air like a noose, Carly watched Valentin's expression shift rapidly between fury and guilt, determination and dread, the kind of emotional turbulence she had never seen from him, which only deepened her fear because if Valentin Cassadine, the man who faced down nations and empires, was scared, then the danger was worse than she believed. And with every second ticking by, Valentin felt the weight of the choice pressing on him: surrender the device and unleash chaos on the world, or refuse and risk Carly's life, something he found increasingly unacceptable. And Carly, sensing his inner struggle, whispered that he could not, under any circumstances, hand over something capable of destroying innocent lives, because she refused to be the reason the world burned. And Valentin swallowed hard, torn between his instinct to protect her and his responsibility to protect everyone else. And he told her that he needed time, time to think, time to strategize, time to find a way to get her out alive without sacrificing global stability. Yet time was exactly what the intruder had weaponized against him, every passing minute tightening the psychological vice around him until escape seemed impossible. And the intruder, satisfied with the growing tension, began pacing slowly, their footsteps echoing ominously through the lobby as they recounted stories from Valentin's past in a casual, conversational tone, stories that revealed pieces of what he had once been: an agent, an asset, a weapon, none of which Carly had fully known. and she listened in stunned silence as the intruder described a mission Valentin had undertaken in Prague, one involving a rogue intelligence broker, a sealed vault, and a betrayal that had apparently initiated the events leading to this very moment, and Valentin snapped for the intruder to stop, his voice sharp and cutting, but the intruder laughed softly, amused by how rattled he was, and continued describing more details, each one slicing deeper into Valentin's composure, and Carly realized this person wasn't simply here for revenge. They were here to dismantle Valentin psychologically, to strip away his identity, piece by piece until he broke, and she watched the struggle play out inside him, saw the flicker of pain in his eyes, and though she despised being dragged into this, a strange surge of empathy rose in her chest because she recognized the haunted look of someone confronting a past they desperately wanted to forget, and as Valentin finally released a long, exhausted exhale, he guided Carly behind a pillar, still shielding her, and told her in a low voice that the intruder's power wasn't in weapons or numbers, it was in information, secrets, truths that no one else knew. And the only way to defeat someone like that was to expose just enough truth to break their leverage without destroying the world in the process. And Carly, though overwhelmed, nodded, telling him she'd survived worse than this and she trusted herself to survive this too. And Valentin looked at her, really looked at her, with something akin to respect softening his hardened expression, and he told her she was braver than she realized, stronger than most people he had met, and even though she wanted to argue, wanted to shove him for dragging her into this, a faint tremor of gratitude passed through her because in that moment, she needed to hear it, and before she could respond, the intruder clapped slowly, mockingly, clearly irritated that their psychological performance had been interrupted, and announced that they were shortening the deadline from 1 hour to 30 minutes, and the collective gasp from the room shook Carly to her core because now the pressure doubled, the danger sharpened, and Valentin felt the seconds slipping away like sand through trembling fingers, and as security exchanged terrified glances, unsure whether to intervene or stand down, Valentin ordered them to do nothing, absolutely nothing, because any attempt at heroism would get them all killed, and Carly placed a hand on Valentin's arm, surprising both of them, and told him that he needed to stop thinking like a hunted man and start thinking like the strategist he used to be, the man who outmaneuvered enemies stronger than him, the man who had survived things no one else could imagine, and something in her words struck him deeply, reigniting a spark he had lost the moment the intruder appeared, and as his eyes hardened with renewed determination, he murmured that she was right, that fear was clouding his judgment, that he needed to be smarter, colder, more calculating, but Carly grabbed his arm again and said, no, he needed to be smarter, yes, but not colder. Because the one thing separating him from the intruder was the fact that he still cared about people, and he needed to use that humanity not as a weakness but as a strategy, and Valentin stared at her, stunned by the clarity of her insight, and then nodded slowly, the gears in his mind shifting from panic to planning, and Carly felt a tiny spark of hope ignite inside her because Valentin Cassadine, when focused, when determined, when cornered but thinking clearly, was one of the most formidable forces on the planet. And as the intruder checked their watch with theatrical impatience, Valentin stepped forward, shielding Carly again but with a new confidence in his posture, and he announced that he would comply, but only if the intruder released Carly first, and the intruder laughed, shaking their head, saying they weren't foolish enough to give up their leverage prematurely, but Valentin insisted, raising his voice, telling them that if they wanted what he stole, they needed him alive, stable, and cooperative, and he would not give them anything while they threatened Carly, and Carly's breath caught because she realized he was gambling, bluffing or negotiating, she didn't know, but gambling nonetheless, and the intruder, studying him with narrowed eyes, seemed momentarily thrown off by the shift in dynamic, and for the first time since their arrival, uncertainty flickered across their expression, a tiny fracture Valentin noticed immediately, and he pressed harder, telling them that if they wanted the asset, they needed him in a rational state, not frantic, not emotional, not under duress, and the intruder hesitated, clearly weighing the logic, and Carly clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, Valentin's strategy was working, and as the seconds ticked by, the tension grew so thick it felt suffocating, and the intruder finally said they would consider releasing Carly if Valentin provided proof that he could actually access the stolen asset, and Valentin agreed, saying he would show them, but only if Carly was moved out of immediate danger, somewhere he could see her but not somewhere she could be used as a physical shield, and the intruder paced slowly, considering the proposal, clearly aware that they held the power but also aware that Valentin held the key to the prize they wanted, and finally, with a smirk, they nodded, agreeing to reposition Carly but not fully release her, and a security reluctantly escorted her to the opposite.